What if life weren't a test with a secret answer key, but an invitation? And what if the self you try to save every day were just a story useful, yet too small for the size of your being? Inspired by Alan Watts, this video reveals a simple, radical secret. Life doesn't need to be controlled to be full. It needs to be participated in. We'll trade urgency for presence, control for cooperation, and separation for belonging. Moving through 6 portals: the myth of the separate self, the art of surrender, the present as the only stage, the ego as a useful fiction, life as play, not judgment, and love as recognition, not possession. Before we go on, try feeling the air on your skin, the weight of your body, where you are, in the most distant sound you can hear. The world isn't out there. It's happening with you, now. Breathe. Drop your shoulders. Isn't a video to believe in it as a video to feel it, perhaps to note the sentence that will open your next now. They wake not from sleep, but from the habit of feeling like an island against a vast world, and begin to notice that what they called edges are really bridges. Scan this conversation with air and fabric, breath trading places with trees, heartbeat drumming because life drums. The self remains useful, a map, yet no longer mistaken for the mountain, so roles become costumes they can wear and set down. Hush. Feedback sounds like tuning, and choices feel like brushstrokes on wet canvas. Presence stops being a moral duty and becomes simple physics school water on the tongue. Steam on glass keys, clicking in time, so planning anchors in contact rather than exile. The turn arrives in rain. Old reflexes urge them to fight, but they let themselves get wet, watching 1,000 droplets choose cheek, collar, wrist, street, until the line between in, here, and out there loosens into one field of experience, the wave recognizing ocean. Afterward, they design for belonging with small, repeatable gestures, 2 minutes of listening before screens, headphone-free walk, mirroring in conflict, flexible schedules, a modest buffer for surprise, candle before work, hand on chest at day's end, because nothing is missing from the moment except the habit of missing it. And if a sentence remains, it is this: they are not a stranger in a foreign world, but the world itself, briefly saying I before returning effortlessly to see. They learn to treat the self as a solid object decor with sharp edges and strict requirements, defend the image, collect proof of worth, win arguments like guarding territory. Gradually, they realize this self is more like a story than a raka, useful narrative that organizes experience, yet dangerous when confused with reality itself. Skin, which once felt like a wall, becomes a membrane again. It translates temperatures, welcomes breeze, allows encounter. The name, the role, the labels: strong, sensitive, leader, learner, stop being a sentence and become a costume, something to wear and return to the hanger as the scene requires. In this shift, the ego loses its tyranny and gains function. Instead of a judge, it becomes a narrator. Instead of a police officer, a guide to context. Its criticism no longer sounds like an attack on existence, but like tuning an instrument. It shrinks from threat into learning data. Confidence, once built on invulnerability, begins to sprout from direct contact with experience. The more present they are, the less mask they need. With this understanding, they start designing their life as a rehearsal studio, not a courtroom. In difficult conversations, they trade the impulse to be right for curiosity. They breathe, mirror what they heard, let silence do its work, then respond. At work, they practice a conscious alternation of roles: assertive when deciding, receptive when revising, and discover that coherence is not rigidity, but living appropriateness. Creativity blossoms when the eye releases the will for a moment. Ideas arrive, are prototyped without drama, receive early feedback, and evolve in short cycles. In daily rituals, they consolidate the learning, 1 minute to feel the body before the first email. A key question in any tension: which version of me serves best right now? In a simple closing at day's end, a hand on the chest, to remember that worth does not depend on performance. Thus, the self stops being a cell and becomes a tool. K. Once an exhausting dispute, regains the lightness of someone who can change masks without losing the face. They spent years living in the later. After the diploma comes peace. After the promotion comes self-love. After the project comes life at last. But the future never arrived as future. It always slipped through the same door. Now, when they realize this, the present stops being a waiting room and becomes the stage itself. It isn't a moral commandment. It's simple physics. The only interface where action and sensation truly happen is this instant. They begin to notice how the mind practices time tourism, replaying scenes from the past, fantasizing tomorrow's catastrophize, how the body, when called upon, pulls everything back home. A warm cup in their hands, air touching the skin. The most distant sound they can hear. The senses become anchors, not distractions. They discover micro-rituals that fit into daily life without turning into a cult of performance. The first sip of water of the day has a ceremony. 3 breaths that drop to the belly before opening email. The key question: what is undeniable here? Whenever anxiety invents invisible enemies, time stops being a road to travel and becomes a texture to inhabit. The key that clicks, the cursor that blinks, the light shifting on the wall, and contact with that texture. The mind, once tense, finds precision. Paradoxically, execution improves when artificial urgency falls away. Athletes call it the zone. Musicians call it playing in time. It's the same intelligence of now, free from the noise of external approval. Goals still exist. They just no longer hijack dignity. Planning becomes designing conditions so that the next now is livable. Not an attempt to oppress the present with future promises. The practice deepens when they begin to design the day in cycles of presence, not blocks of anxiety. To create now check-ins at every transition. Before sending, feel the feet. Before replying, hear the silence between words. Before deciding, notice the tension in the shoulders and release it. They trade multitasking for single-task sprints of 25 to 40 minutes, with breaks in which the body truly changes context. Look far, open the window, touch water. They batch disable notifications and reclaim the autonomy of focus. When intrusive thoughts arise, they name them gently, planning, memory, fear, and return to the nearest sensory datum, like coming back to the beat in a music rehearsal. In difficult conversations, they stay with what was said, not what the mind predicted. In creative work, they let the hand move before judgment, because judgment that arrives too early kills flow. They also care for the margins: decent sleep, morning light on the face, a walk without headphones, meals in which, at least for the first 3 minutes, no one touches the phone. None of this is romanticizing the everyday. It's attention engineering. 5. Doze and tea become perfect unexpected events, continuing, but their relationship to them changes. Instead of fighting what already is, they cooperate with present conditions and influence what they can. And little by little, the greatest revolution happens without fireworks. The now stops being currency, traded for future promises, and becomes the place where they finally live. A simple address always open, where reality is clear enough to act upon and soft enough to be loved. They grew up believing the self was an indestructible solid center with rigid edges, owner of a resume, a record, and a reputation to defend like a castle under watch. Over time, they realize the ego works more like a useful fiction, a narrator that organizes chaos, signs, cause, and effect, builds chapters, and decides who is the hero and who is the villain. Useful? Yes. It's tyrant. No need. When they confuse the story with reality, everything becomes a threat. Criticism sounds like a sentence. Error turns into ontological failure. Change feels like death. As they restage the day with more awareness, they notice identity is made of clothes: professional, partner, child, leader, learner, hanging on an inner rack. In some scenes, wearing assertiveness protects. In others, listening saves the bond. Maturity stops being marble-like coherence and becomes living appropriateness. It's not changing masks out of falseness. It's choosing the right tool for the task. Skin, once a wall, becomes a membrane. K. The name stops being a verdict and goes back to being a provisional label. They begin mapping the triggers of the inner narrator, the perfectionism that demands applause before the first attempt, the comparison that turns the feed into a courtroom, the haste that confuses urgency with importance, instead of silencing the ego, impossible and unnecessary. They reposition it from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. The narrator keeps describing, but no longer decides alone. And when criticism arrives, it's no longer a stab, it's instrument tuning. Shame, which used to clamp the body and throat, becomes a signal that something precious needs care, not punishment. In practice, they create small levers to remember the self is a tool. Before decisive meetings, they ask, which version of me serves best here? And take 3 breaths. K. Placing attention on their feet to topple the theater of I have to impress. In conflicts, K. They swap certainty for curiosity. They mirror the other sentence. Leave a beat of silence. Ask, what else is important? In creative work, they institute the draft right. 30 minutes producing without judgment. 10 minutes revising with the ego editor. And only then do they show it to someone they trust. On social media, they set boundaries and end out hours. Lists of content that nourish instead of inflamed. Reminders that likes aren't an effective gauge, they're statistical noise. To integrate rejected parts, they practice a shadow inventory. They write 3 traits they criticize in others and ask where those traits, well-directed, could serve. Stubbornness becomes perseverance. Vanity becomes care for presentation. Sensitivity becomes a risk radar. When self-demand spikes, they do basic reparenting. Hand on chest, short-circuit phrase, I help myself, in one minimal action that proves it now. A glass of water, a 5-minute walk, a request for help. Little by little, the inner stage changes lighting. The ego stops shouting, be impeccable, to deserve, and learns to whisper, let S adjust and move on. They discover that firm boundaries don't require harshness, that vulnerability isn't indiscriminate exposure, and that dignity doesn't depend on performance. The self stops being a cell and becomes a toolbox. Life, once endless defense, turns into a workshop where narratives are edited in service of what truly matters. Contact, creation, humble coherence, and the freedom to change costumes without losing the face. Els Cresceram, Accreditando, Q Avida, Ira Umaprova.com. Gabarito, Aquato, Am Camino, Estrito, Ande, Custava, Arada, Custava, Pantos, Davala, Pesto, Amdia, Tracum, a metaphora. Se vida for musica, e danca. O sentido, no esta, no ultimo accord. Mas, no ato, de tocar. Brincar, aqui noa, infantilisaco. Uma postura physiologica, e cognitiva, q libra. O sistema nervoso. Do modo, amica, e, devolve, precisu, ao, gesto. Els, comicam, pequeno. Transforming, tearface, M. Jogos, Claris, Clara, A. Duraco, Curta, Sprints, de Brincadeira, D. 2240 minutos. Com, Objetivo, Minomo, Menchorvo, Esbocar, Truss, Ideas, Escrever, 200 Palavras. Tester, Duas, Variax, D. Design. Adotum, Apregunta, Q, Abrera, Camino, Se, Fas, Brincadeira, O, Q, E, U, Tinteria, Agora, E, Substituum, O, Mas, Por Sim, E, Regra, Do, Improviso, Paramanter, O, Fluxo, D, Possibilitates, Crium Tambum, Orçamentos, D, Aero, Quantas, Tentativas, Phallus, Cabine, Por, Semana, Antes, D, Ascender, O. alarmi, D. vergana, A.O. quanticoca, O. trapeco, domesticum, O. meadow. Usem restrixes como alavankas, the criotive date video como penas, angulo, texto, 30 minutos, 300 palabras, conversa.com, tras pergentis, 0, justificativus, descabrem, q, limites, bim, escogidos, funcionam, como, moldora, q, rilca, pintora, equip, tracum, a reunio, expositiva, pelo laboratorio, prototipos, visuae shiwo, menudos, feedback, rapito, cartus, fungiona, no fungiona ideas, no relacionamento, instituse, o, rito, ludico, semano, kazenhar.com, regra, boba, camina, simdestina.com, tema, de conversa, leave q, fatalis, vincola, ritos, a carga, de resolver, a relico. 8a, a spiritually date, muta de textura, meditar, no amaze, performer, serena dade. Explorer de tard, contando, o, miro, de micro distracts como, se, collectionism, conscious, na, prior. O, humorvera, ferumata, de regulaco, rear, de si, mesmo, nio, desqualifica, o, esporco, titra, de perfeccionismo. A.O. noticu, brincar, regenera, els, untendum, por q, projetos, imperados, voltem, a, enderquando, a, serita, contre, a, ludica de, expando, campo de monobra, cam, a brincadera, gana, infrastructura, para, sustentar, ambical, sem colapsa, presenca, els projetum, o trabajo, ciclos, aquecimento, 2 to 3 minutos, digesto, physico, simples, para, intra, no corpo, jogo, principle, misal, claricam, pontuacal, symbolica, cool down, anotar, oq, apprenderum, no apenis, oq, antragram, constram, placus, q, celebram, consistentia, dies, sagaidos, de pratica, ves, de idolatra, picos, introducem chefs, de phase intensine, terfas, puco atima, do nivel, actual, paramanter, o, desafio, etimo, nam teduo, penico, quando, ansidat, tenta, sequestra, o, processo, respondum.com, microdesafios, ridiculos, o, sufficiente, paraserum, passives, agora, phrase, ruum, aspoco, tordo, k, take, unico, sem cortes, acidum, q, aversa, bil heat, de entrada, das versos, 2e3, na communicaco, applicum, grammatica, de playground, turnos, de fala, regras, simples, campanaco, de sinais pausa, equals respido, pergunta, equals confite, anagastao, do tempo, alternam, de play, immersa, monetarieth, soft play, terfas, leaves, q, permitem, associaca, lever, coda, gendo, margins, richwa, de, camoko, fim, ascenda, vila, fecker, o, laptop, no, pito, quando, chegum, oz, inevitaveus, tropicos, videos, textos, malrespidos, dias, d0, energia, no decretum, sentinca, capitam, continuer, cotam, didos, oq, ficu, claro, oq, pozo, simplificar, q, regra, de jogo precisa, cia, ajustada, assim, brincar, tixa, decia, premio, ps meta, vira, o, proprio, metodo, de produzia, amar, aprenda, a vida, infim, si do, tribunal, volta, ao, park, lugar, unda, Se experimenta.com. Respito. Se era sim humilhaco. Se acerta sim arroganza. E onde o valor de estar vivo now precisa ser provado a cada paso. Penas vivido com curiosidade. They were taught, like almost everyone, to love as if they were possessing, to attach invisible labels, demand guarantees, and measure the value of the bond by control, quincey, and predictability. Over time, they realize that kind of love suffocates what it tries to protect. They then learn to recognize the other, not as an object, but as a process, someone in motion, crossed by rhythms, seasons, contradictions, and discoveries. Love becomes a practice of presence that offers three simple and difficult things: attention, space, and care. Attention is real focus, eyes, body, a silence that listens. Space as permission for the other to keep being who they are with preferences, tempos, desires that don't always match. Care as a commitment to reduce harm and increase trust without theatricalizing sacrifice. They begin to see that there are three relationships always happening: person A with themselves, person B with themselves, and the quality of the space between. And it's this between that needs to be nourished. Jealousy, once treated as proof of love or scandal, becomes a signal to be read. Fear of loss, lack of predictability, the need to name boundaries. Instead of policing, they investigate gently. They make explicit agreements, what each one understands by respect, availability, transparency, and review them with cadence, because good agreements are living ones. Okay. Differentiate non-attachment from indifference. Non-attachment is holding with open hands, trusting reciprocity and ethics. Indifference is abandoning care. They discover that true autonomy brings people closer when each can breathe. The meeting is a choice, not captivity. And, curiously, it's the awareness of impermanence that colors the bond with gratitude. Each coffee, each touch, each conversation may be the last in that form. That's why it's worth being whole now. In practice, they built an alphabet of gestures that sustain this non-possessive love. They create simple rituals. A 10-minute end-of-day check-in. What moved through you? Does anything need repair? What micro-gesture would feel good? A weekly, playful date where the goal is not to fix the relationship, but to feed the bond. Cooking with a silly rule. Wandering aimlessly, watching the sunset in silence. And a repair kit for conflicts. Pause before reacting. Breathe together for 30 seconds. Mirror what the other said. Let me see if I got it. Validate the emotion without agreeing with the narrative, and only then propose paths forward. They adopt clear boundaries as a form of respect protected ours. Consent for sensitive topics. Freedom to say no without punishment. Disproportionately celebrate the positive. It's a 5-to-1 rule of micro-gestures of affection for each friction. They learn useful grammars, asking without accusing. When X happens, I feel Y. Would you be open to Z? Thinking specifically, naming the impact, disagreeing without dehumanizing. They use somatic practices to re-regulate the nervous system together. Eye contact for 60 seconds. Synchronized breathing. Touch that asks, may I? And when something breaks, they avoid the courtroom. They set timelines for repair, try to reconnect within 24 hours, own responsibility as far as possible, and choose one concrete action that makes today 10% better. The relationship stops being a proving ground and becomes a greenhouse, a place where the best of each person grows because it doesn't need armor to exist. Loving, after all, is recognition. I see you happening and I want to cooperate with what makes you alive, and accepting that the bond is a work in progress. Worthy of editing, watered by curiosity, protected by boundaries, animated, by humor, and sustained by the courage to let the other be even when that requires the self to grow.